Three games.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they predict us to be like we had been over the past few years, 3-4 wins.
Look at Indiana University basketball and its famous and at times infamous head coach, Bob Knight.
It seems so strange that the only weapon that I have to fight this battle with is the truth, and it seems like such a small weapon. You know, I mean, you would think that the truth is what everyone wants to know and everyone wants to hear, but it's not what everyone wants to know.
Come here, boy.
Worshipped, a virtual way of life for an entire state. But according to some who've been through Coach Bob Knight's program, there is a heavy price to pay to be a part of the legend. The following story was written by producer Robert Abbott and narrated by Mike Galanos. We must warn you, it does contain some harsh language.
This is Bob Knight of Indiana University, the only active coach with 3 national titles. A man who in his 29 years at Indiana has seen 7 of his former Hoosiers move on to Division I or NBA head coaching jobs, and has been a mentor to hundreds of young men like Charlie Miller, who played 4 years for Knight and graduated in 1998.
Behind closed doors, Coach Knight is genuine. I mean, he jokes, you know, he's a down-to-earth person.
And this is Bob Knight, intimidating, temperamental, profane,
and my critics can kiss my ass.
A coach who bullies referees, his players, and the media.
Then why doesn't he come speak to me too if it's such a goddamn offense? Some of you people ought to go find another way of living.
This is Bob Knight, a full professor of health, physical education, and recreation. A man who has helped to raise some $5 million for his university's library, the object of near fanatical devotion from his former players and from citizens throughout the state of Indiana.
Last summer I had a basketball camp at home where I raised money. It's for boys and girls, 3rd to 8th graders. I called him like on maybe Wednesday. He came Thursday and spoke to my kids at camp.
And this is Bob Knight.
He had me by the throat. I'd probably say that little situation lasted about 5 seconds. I grabbed his wrist and started walking back. And at this point, people, coaches, Dan Dockage, Felling, grabbed Coach Knight and pulled him away.
Neil Reed says it was his childhood dream to play basketball at Indiana for Bob Knight. And in 1994, he accepted a scholarship to play for the Hoosiers. Reed had been a high school All-America and 2-time state MVP, playing for East Jefferson High in a New Orleans suburb. The son of a coach, Reed was just the sort of gritty, mentally tough, hard-working player that Knight loves. But during his 3 years in Indiana, Reed says he saw a far different Bob Knight than the man he had idolized.
Each year there's a term that they use up there called whipping boy. There's no question Neil was the whipping boy, based on the fact that everybody felt like he could take anything.
Neil was a really tough-nosed guy, and Coach Knight knew that about Neil.
People say, well, you knew what it was like. Well, I didn't know that was going to happen. No one knows that's going to happen. No one's going to believe that that's going to happen. And that's fine. They don't have to. But it happened to me, and it's something I have to live with.
Reed says that at a practice during his junior year in 1997, Knight confronted him for not shouting out teammate Larry Richardson's name after Reed had made a pass to him. Reed stood his ground with Knight, insisting that he had indeed yelled out Richardson's name. When Richardson sided with Reed, Reed says Knight attacked him.
And at that point, Coach just thrust right at me, just came right at me. Wasn't far away enough to where, you know, I could see something coming. Was close enough to just come at me, reach, and put his hand around my throat. He had one hand. He came out with 2 hands, but grabbed me with 1 hand.
Did he actually choke him? I don't think he did, but he did put his hands around him. I thought that was too much. He probably, you know, he shouldn't have done it, but he did.
Call it whatever you want. I mean, it doesn't matter what people call it. I call it choking. If you put your hands around someone's throat, I mean, there's no other reason why you would.
That's just his way of expressing himself. Some guys can put up with it, and some guys can't.
People came in to separate us like we were in a schoolyard going to fight. And that, you know, I actually have respect for adults, and I certainly have respect for coaches, and that certainly wasn't the case. But I wasn't going to let him hold me by the throat long or squeeze hard.
CNN Sports Illustrated has corroborated Reed's account of the choking incident with 3 other people who were at practice that day. They declined to go on camera and asked that their names not be used because they were afraid that speaking out against Bob Knight could damage their careers. In describing the incident, one said, quote, "If he touched me like that, it would have been all over the news. There would have been a fight. I would have ended up with a black eye, and he would have ended up in the hospital." This is the first time that Reed has spoken publicly about the incident.
I'm just trying to put it behind me, tell my story and put it behind me, because I don't want to live with this story for the rest of my life. It's too painful to me, and it's too painful to my parents.
Okay.
The saddest part is seeing your child hurt. That's tough. It's real tough.
I'm not against Bobby Knight in the game of basketball. What he's done to my son is bad. What he's taken from my son is bad.
Reed started 72 games and averaged just under 10 points a game during his 3 years at Indiana. He says now that he didn't have the courage to walk out at the time he says Knight choked him. But at the end of that season, when Knight told him that he would not get to play his senior year, Reed took Knight at his word and transferred to Southern Mississippi. Less than a year later, another former high school All-America, 7-foot center Jason Collier, left Indiana, just 9 games into the season. Collier transferred to Georgia Tech, where he has just completed his college career. Collier also declined a request to be interviewed on camera, saying only, "I don't want to talk about it." But when he left the program, Collier said he could no longer take Knight's relentless yelling and constant criticism. This audio tape from a 1991 practice, which has been widely circulated on the internet, shows just how volatile Knight can be.
Then I'm leaving and you guys will run till you can't even suffer. Now I'm tired of this shit. I'm sick and tired of an 8-10 record. I'm tired of losing to Purdue. I'm not here to around this week. Now you may be, but I'm not. Now I'm going to guarantee you that if we don't play up there Monday night, you aren't going to believe the next 4 days. Now I am not here to get my ass beat on Monday. Now you better understand that right now. This is absolute bullshit. Now I'll run your ass right into the ground. I mean, I'll run you. You'll think last night was a picnic. I had to sit around for a year with an 8-10 record in this league. And I mean, you will not put me in that position again, or you will goddamn pay for it like you can't believe.
You've heard the tape on the internet. How often is that what you hear during a year?
That right there is what I wish everyone watching this could hear, so they could really understand what it is like playing there, or when things are going bad there, that take away the love from the game or the enjoyment of the game. Where you hear something like that, you're just like, you get to the point where you're like, screw this. It just turns you off.
Richard Mandeville spent 5 years playing Indiana basketball and graduated in 1998.
You see him, he can be the greatest, friendliest, nicest guy, but then all of a sudden he can be the craziest, meanest, just the last person you want to be around.
When they get there, and when they get in the isolated environment of their practices, then Dr. Jekyll's gone. Mr. Hyde appears, and it's not very pretty.
Gary Donna has been covering basketball in the state of Indiana for 30 years.
I think it's a demeaning, dehumanizing, debilitating type situation. I think you're constantly playing in fear. I think you're being intimidated. If you're being, as things that I've heard, if you're being choked, if you're being grabbed, if you're being pushed, if you're being headbutted, if you're being kicked, if you're being spit on, if you're being slapped, I think those are kind of things that are kind of beyond the ordinary realm of discipline in this day and age.
He got on me sometimes like he got on everybody, but he knew I could take that, and I never let it get me down. And I just kept on pushing through it, and now that I'm done, we stay in touch. I mean, when I finished, actually, he wrote me a letter, just let me know how much he appreciated what I did for the program down there.
Statistics provided by Indiana indicate that the number of early departures from Knight's program is no greater than that of other Division I schools. But over the last 3 years, the Hoosiers have seen 3 key starters leave a program that they seem made for. CNN Sports Illustrated has learned that the year Jason Collier left the program, freshman Luke Recker, a former Mr. Indiana high school star and the very ideal of a Knight athlete, met with Knight at the end of the season and told him he wanted to transfer. According to 3 sources, Knight blew up, threatened to resign, told his coaching staff to find new jobs, and told Recker it was all his fault.
After he talked to Coach Knight, he came to my house and it was a mess. He was like, oh my God, I mean, he felt like he was going to ruin all the assistant coaches' lives, the program, the whole state of Indiana. He thought if he left, he would probably never be welcome back to Indiana, the state, or anything.
Recker also declined our interview request. The day after Knight's tirade, the coach met with Recker and told him he would change his ways. Recker made up his mind to stay another year. He led the Hoosiers in scoring, but at the end of his sophomore year, Recker faxed in his decision to transfer while Knight was out of the country. On one level, Bob Knight has run a model program, a graduation rate that is among the best in the nation, and not a single recruiting violation in nearly 3 decades. And Knight is well known for helping his players find jobs when their careers are over. His determination to run a clean program has enabled him to survive some notable public embarrassments. His being convicted in absentia of punching a policeman in Puerto Rico in 1979, throwing a chair during a game in 1985, and accidentally headbutting a player in 1994. But former players who decided to speak to CNN Sports Illustrated say similar episodes take place behind closed doors.
In our locker room, there's a bathroom attached to it. He came out, pants down to his ankles, and just wiped his ass and said, "This is how you guys are playing."
And he just stuck his hand out with that toilet paper after he had wiped and just kind of showed everyone and then walked back into the stall.
That's just his way of, I guess, expressing himself. If I can't tell you, I have to show you. And what other way to show you rather than pull my pants down, wipe my ass, and say you playing like shit? That's Coach Knight.
Is that acceptable for a professor at this university, a coach at Indiana University?
Well, I don't think it's acceptable for an adult. In fact, I wouldn't accept it in a child.
Murray Sperber is a tenured professor of English and American Studies at Indiana, and during his 29 years in Bloomington has become one of Knight's few vocal critics at the university. Sperber says that Knight's success on the court and his hero status throughout the state has created one set of rules for Bob Knight and one for the rest of the faculty.
It's grounds for losing your tenure. I know if I did it in this classroom here at Indiana, I would probably lose my tenure by the time I got back to my office on the 4th floor.
CNN Sports Illustrated has made several requests for interviews with the president of the university, Dr. Miles Brand, the athletic director, Clarence Doniger, Coach Knight, and 4 current players who were on the team when some of these incidents occurred. The athletic department said that it would not make Coach Knight or the players available for interviews. The president's office said that if Coach Knight would not agree to an interview, the president would not either. According to Neil Reed, President Brand has deferred to Bob Knight before, allowing himself to be publicly thrown out of his own team's practice.
Coach Knight could hear him and just stop practice. Like, God damn it. Quit that talking. I don't come to your office and talk while you're working. Get the hell out of here. And President kind of just looked and grabbed his stuff, got up and walked out.
Through his spokesman, President Brand denies ever having been thrown out of practice by Knight.
Has he ever kicked the president out of practice?
He's kicked him out. I know that. What he said to him, I'm not sure, but President was always coming around, and he's not even kicked him out. He's kicked people out of practice, during practice, if he's pissed off.
I think that if you had professors, if you had teachers, if you had administrators, if you had office personnel, anybody that acted as he has done and has done the things that he has done, I can't think of another person in a position there who would not have been terminated.
I call him the Emperor of Indiana. And there's no one in this state, really, who will stand up to him, and certainly there's no one in this university who will. And so, in a sense, if you're the emperor, you're allowed to do what you want. You want to wipe your ass in front of your team? have the toilet paper, Bob.
While Sperber is outspoken, he is not alone among Indiana faculty concerned about Knight's abusive behavior. As far back as 1987, after John Feinstein's book A Season on the Brink revealed Knight's coaching methods, the Bloomington Faculty Council adopted a statement of student-athlete rights. It says, athletes shall not be subjected to physically or verbally abusive, intimidating, coercive, humiliating, or degrading behavior. It goes on to say that athletes shall also be encouraged to report any violations of these policies to the appropriate university authorities. Gary Donna says some players may fear the consequences of speaking out.
What are they going to win from it? You know, I mean, if someone is really angry and is out to get Coach Knight, I don't know who that one person is that has the power that approaches his or has any means of making that happen. I mean, if it were the most vengeful person, I still think they'd be whistling in the wind.
If you cross Bob Knight and you leave the program early and you're vilified, as most people who have left the program are, you got to make it on your own. Life gets a little harder for you.
There are fewer of these young boys. That's the whole point. And they have no power. They have no forum to speak. They have no platform. They're no one. They're kids. They're kids that often don't get a chance to express reasons that they left or what's happened in their life. They're kids.
That's Bob Knight University. He just loans it to the state on occasions. I don't know when it's going to end. When somebody steps up in position of power and says enough, enough.
Neil Reed graduated from Southern Mississippi in May and played professionally in the Netherlands last year before deciding his heart was no longer in basketball. After leaving Indiana, Richard Mandeville played professionally in Australia last year and is currently working out in hopes of getting a tryout with an NBA team.
The guys who leave that program make the best decision ever. If I had to do it all over again, I would have left after my freshman year. I would have gotten out of there. You know, everyone who's going to be on this are the bad guys. We're the lowlifes. We're the guys who never worked hard. We were lazy. We didn't want to win. We're gonna be made out to be the bad guys in this whole thing.
I'm not out to get anyone. It seems so strange that the only weapon that I have to fight this battle with is the truth, and it seems like such a small weapon. You know, I mean, you would think that the truth is what everyone wants to know and everyone wants to hear, but it's not what everyone wants to know.
Prior to viewing the piece you just saw and in response to the advanced publicity of the story, Indiana officials held a press conference to respond to the allegations. Bob Knight was not present, but others, including current Indiana players, defended the program while questioning Neil Reed's character.
Guys that have transferred from here and had reasons for transferring from here and from, you know, reasons from coach verbally and physically abusing them. I mean, that just shows that you have not developed into a man, and I think that's the main reason why this guy, Neil Reed, is coming out with these statements.
As far as the allegations, you know, I played with Neil for a year, and, you know, I was here when he was voted off the team. You know, he didn't leave by choice. He was voted off the team, and by playing with Neil a year, you know, I learned that anything that he did wrong was never his fault. And whether it's a bad pass or being out of position, you know, it's never his fault. It was always somebody else's. And I think, you know, things that he's saying now and the things that he said when he left are, you know, just him not being able to take responsibility for his actions.
Former Indiana basketball player and current Bowling Green head coach Dan Dockage also disputed Reed's claims, saying, quote, "I was an assistant coach when Neil Reed was playing at Indiana, and his allegation that I ever had to separate him from Coach Knight is totally false. Anyone who has seen Coach at practice knows that he will physically move a player by the waist or shoulders from one spot on the floor to another to make a coaching point. But for Reed to say that I ever had to separate him from Coach is false." CNN Sports Illustrated will continue to follow this story, and be sure to tune into Newsstand Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on CNN for any further developments. Sports Tonight will continue in just a moment.
The market, of course, looked upon this very favorably, and the resulting surge in our stock price brings our market capitalization to within 10% of year-end projections. To elaborate on what this means for the company, I'd like to turn the floor over to our chairman.
round. Thursday before that game, Knight took on the media, former player Neil Reed, and accusations about a program, his program. It was a classic performance. Scott Walker was there to witness it.
Bob Knight arrived at Marine Midland Arena, exuding the aura of business as usual. In fact, he made a point to say he would not mention the broadcast report where former players Neil Reed and Richard Mandeville accused Knight of physical and mental abuse. But in a scheduled 15-minute interview session, the coach went on a 20-minute filibuster, defending himself in typical Knight fashion.
I don't know if people understand this. A kid that was voted off the team by returning players by an 8-0 vote. Another kid who the players kind of laughed at because of his work ethic and his approach to play.
Knight defended his motivational style.
Have done close to 1,000 things to motivate kids as individuals or teams. And I'll guarantee you that a lot of them I wouldn't want to talk about at a church social or the PTA meeting or a garden party. But we're not teaching kids how to play canasta. I mean, this is a game where kids get bloody noses and they get broken legs and they get hurt and they got to compete.
And Knight found humor at the expense of the media.
Unnamed sources. Tell me what's an unnamed source. Does anybody do that? I mean, tell them what the hell is, you know, you're going to ask me questions. What's an unnamed source? You know, as an unnamed source, me standing up here and saying that I just was told outside by somebody who doesn't wish to be identified that 65% of the men in this room are having extramarital affairs with sheep. Is that an unnamed source?
Knight said the one positive through the situation has been the former players who have rallied behind him, support that he likened to an encounter with Isaiah Thomas in November.
He walked up to me and he grabbed the hold of my shirt. I probably taught him that as a player. He grabbed the hold of my shirt and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Coach, don't you ever change. I needed you and kids need you. Don't change." So I don't think I will.
While Knight and his players said the controversy did not affect their preparation for Pepperdine, he did find fault with his team's late Friday start. He has long said no team should play a game that starts after 9 p.m. Knight points out, for the 9th time in 12 NCAA tournament games, Indiana will start a game after 9. In Buffalo, Scott Walker, ESPN.
Last spring, CNN Sports Illustrated set out to learn why, over the past 3 years, 3 high school All-America basketball players had left the Indiana University team, one of the most storied college basketball programs in the nation. On March 14th, we aired those findings in a report that focused on the conduct of head coach Bob Knight. For the first time, some of Knight's former players spoke openly about physical and verbal abuse they say they endured from Coach Knight. Here is our follow-up to that report. This piece was reported and produced by Robert Abbott and is narrated by Larry Smith.
Neil Reed, a former high school All-America who started 72 games for Indiana, alleged that during his junior year in 1997, he was choked by head coach Bob Knight. Reed said the incident occurred at practice when he disagreed with something Knight had said.
And at that point, coach just thrust right at me, just came right at me. Wasn't far away enough to where, you know, I could see something coming. Was close enough to just come at me, reach, and put his hand around my throat. He had one hand. He came at with 2 hands, but grabbed me with 1 hand.
Like many schools, Indiana videotapes its basketball practices, and for months rumors have circulated that a tape existed of the choking incident. After our report aired, CNN Sports Illustrated received this tape.
Hey, that was me. Oh.
Though the incident occurred 3 years ago, Neil Reed had not seen the tape until now.
What was your initial reaction when you first saw that? What ran through your head?
It's disgusting to me. I don't need a tape to tell me it happened. Other people, I mean, it might help with other people's. I don't know, I see it enough in my head, and when I watch it, it's just disgusting for me to watch it. If it weren't me, I'd be disgusted. If it, you know what I mean?
Even before Reed's allegations first aired last month, the university held a press conference at which 2 current Indiana players who had played with Reed denounced their former teammate and challenged his accusations.
Guys that have transferred from here and had reasons for transferring from here, and from you know, reasons from coach verbally and physically abusing them. I mean, that just shows that you have not developed into a man, and I think that's the main reason why this guy Neil Reed is coming out with these statements.
You know, I never saw Coach grab Neil around the neck or choke him in any way. Never seen Coach touch anybody or grab anybody in any way trying to physically harm them.
That same day, Tim Garl, Indiana's basketball trainer for the past 19 years, said, quote, "The choking thing never happened. Give me a lie detector," end quote. The following day, Bob Knight did something he rarely does. He allowed a local TV news crew to shoot practice. With the cameras rolling, Knight proceeded to move his players around the floor by their necks. During subsequent interviews with that station, another local station, and HBO's Real Sports, Knight addressed Reed's allegations.
Maybe I grabbed Neil Reed by the shoulder. Maybe I took him by the back of the neck. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember everything that I've ever done in practice.
The specific charges. Did you grab Neil Reed?
Hey, I probably have grabbed every player that's ever played for me at one time or another, Mike. I mean, I grab guys, I put them in a position, I put them down, I set them here, I block out the guy, I block out somebody. I mean, I've coached that way for 36 years.
But by the neck?
I might have grabbed him by the back of the neck. I might have grabbed the guy and moved him over. I mean, if you choke a guy, I would think that he needs hospitalization.
Did you go like this?
I don't remember that. I'm sure that I have with kids. I'll tell you this. There isn't anything I ever did with one kid that I didn't do with a lot of other kids. I have no apologies to make whatsoever for anything that I've done in an attempt to motivate kids.
The next evening, Knight refused to take questions about the allegations at Indiana's press conference before the first round of the NCAA tournament. But Knight did spend nearly 22 minutes defending his coaching techniques.
If my kids left and they weren't successful and they didn't have degrees and they were on the bread line or they were selling drugs or they were in jail for one thing or another, then I'd really have a lot of questions about just what the hell my methods were all leading to.
On March 17th, in the first round of the NCAA tournament, Knight's Hoosiers were thumped by Pepperdine 77-57.
I'm not talking to the greatest assemblage of basketball minds I've ever been before, I don't think, but you guys have all had to figure that out. We just got pounded.
After our initial story aired, 3 former Indiana players called CNN Sports Illustrated to say they had witnessed incidents similar to that described by Reed. Ricky Calloway, a forward on the Hoosiers' 1987 national championship team, said he saw Knight slap former forward Darryl Thomas and punch 2-time All-America guard Steve Alford. Both Alford and Thomas denied being physically attacked by Knight. But Calloway told CNN Sports Illustrated that based on what he had experienced in his years at Indiana, he had every reason to believe Neil Reed was telling the truth.
I wanted to put some validity to what Neil Reed said. I felt that he was getting the bad end of the stick. What he said was true. I've seen some of the things that happened to him happen on our team to some of my teammates.
On March 23rd, Indiana President Miles Brand appointed 2 university trustees to investigate all of the allegations in the CNN Sports Illustrated report. These included Reed's assertion that he had been choked, an accusation that Knight had brandished soiled toilet paper at his players, and an allegation that Brand himself had been thrown out of practice by Knight.
These are serious charges, and we owe it to everyone involved, including Coach Knight, that we get to the ultimate truth.
I want to emphasize one thing. There are no sacred cows at Indiana University. That includes the basketball program.
Immediately after Reed's account of the choking incident aired, Walda told the Indianapolis Star, quote, "I'm speaking as a board member. As a lawyer, I would put no stock in it," end quote. In an editorial on March 27th, the university student newspaper called for an independent investigation into the charges. In the first report, Reed had said that 2 assistant coaches had to pull Knight off him. The tape does not bear that out.
I know what happens, and that proves what happens. I think the moment after something like that, especially a 20-year-old kid being in that situation, I don't think you can find fault in a little bit of a... I mean, I'm not lying. That's how I remember the thing happening. And Felling's 5 feet from me. As far as people coming in between, I remember people coming in between us.
On Tuesday evening, Walda and Eichhorn flew to Atlanta to view the tape at CNN Sports Illustrated. Knight was offered the opportunity to join them, but his spokesman declined on his behalf, saying Knight would defer to the trustees.
The tape does seem to shed some light on the reported incident between Coach Knight and Neil Reed. Now it will be up to us to continue and complete our investigation. We'll be comparing what we've seen in the video with the accounts from witnesses. We will pursue the taking of more evidence from witnesses. And finally, we will issue a final report, which will include, as part of the evidence reviewed, the videotape. I've taken this assignment quite seriously. We will proceed to complete our review in a very professional and thorough manner.
The findings of the official investigation are due no later than the 3rd week of June.
Despite the firestorm around Coach Knight, his supporters are many, as evidenced Sunday in Bloomington, Indiana, where around 500 Knight backers gathered on the steps of Assembly Hall. Their mission was to not only support the coach, but denounce what they call negative press reports. Coach Knight did not attend. Fred?
Now we turn to baseball, and the San